Hi, welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
My first question for you today is that you obviously have a lot of expertise in the Toronto land and the development market. Um, let's talk about over the last couple of years, some of these developers, especially the sort of the small to medium-sized developers, who really assembled parcels of land with an intent to build and develop. And they bought at $200 to perhaps $300 a buildable square foot, especially in the core urban areas and in those pockets. And the hard cost was, let's say, presumptively $400 a square foot with contingencies, maybe the soft sort of another $300 on top of that, and then some financing costs. So, they were like $1,000 to $1,100 a foot for a product to be delivered in next couple of years, but pre-sale centers to be open this summer. And they were obviously, trying to have a 15% development margin in there, which the lenders want to see as well. And with that pro forma now, with the exit prices projected at $1,400 or $1,500 square foot to sell, there's a lot of uncertainty around that. So now coming backwards and unwinding that, a lot of these borrowers have land loans at 12% with lenders who themselves are having redemption issues, and they are having demand for that capital to go out. So from your perspective, are you seeing any distress? Are you seeing any troubles? Are you getting any calls from the developers who need some help, keeping in mind that these performers are all upside down in many instances?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to the strength of that developer to weather the storm. And it all depends on where they are in the development cycle. I've been receiving calls from smaller developers that now have gone through zoning, and in their pro forma, now they need to sell units because that's where they are. They're through the planning process. And so we are getting calls from these developers saying that they would like to liquidate. So we are having conversations. This is before the receivership scenario, and some, unfortunately, that I talk to, you do the math, and either way, COVID or not, the numbers are way off. Some maybe thought in a rising market that would save them, but so it's going to get worse over the coming months as these projects that come to our team, we can't unwind them or restructure them for these people just because the deal won't allow it. It won't allow for further capital injection. So if these groups do not take a hit on their equity now, they're most likely going to be in a receivership scenario, power of sale scenario. So it's going to happen. And as this goes on, if we're talking months, it'll happen a lot more. If we're talking only weeks, it'll happen less. But certainly seeing that.
Are you seeing some examples whereby there's a real pressure to sell some of these sites, the land sites? And if so, what is the delta pre-COVID and post-COVID in terms of, let's say, buildable per square foot site, everything else remaining equal? It would appear that it's at par at a minimum, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is a drop. But I also am not surprised that there's potentially a gap between the buyer and seller expectations, especially in transitionary times like this. But is there any evidence? Is there something that you can share with us as to what is that delta today and where that delta might be pre-COVID and post-COVID over the next 6 months?
Yeah. So I'm hearing of deals that are being discussed that have, a 10% discount on them.
Mm-hmm.
And, that discount always goes to the level of distress that the vendor is under, and then the timing of who's at the table. Because right now the issue is liquidity, and certainty has a huge premium to it. So I would say anywhere between 10 and 20%.
Mm-hmm.
Land prices have come, or at least the expectation is from the buyers that have money to deploy are expecting that level of a discount. And typically the ones that have that amount of capital are not desperate to buy. And so if those conversations are happening now on a number of sites, it will only be a matter of time before those vendors say yes.
And is there a shift happening from these projects projected to be developed in the planning as condos and residential from that perspective to now with these performers being offside to do more of a rental? Perhaps the rental market has been very strong. Depending on where you are, the rents $3.50 to $5 a square foot, maybe even more in some pockets. And arguably the construction cost for an apartment building perhaps is not as high as a luxury high-end condo building. Do you think this is a good time for several of these projects which are at planning stage to start thinking about shifting to rental strategy?
Yeah, 100%. And some are already doing that. You can't really rely on launching product, I would think, if you're planning until 2021. And so some people have bought land very well and have taken it through the planning stage, where then now they may have certain institutional buyers that would take it on and build rental. Or they may partner with institutional capital to now build rental. But certainly not having to rely on pre-construction sales and having, a deep balance sheet as a partner would allow you to come in, buy at reasonably good prices that typically would be reserved for condo purchasers, land purchasers last year. Now rental purchasers can come in, provide certainty of transaction. As well, they're not dealing with having to rent these units for another 24 to 36 months, in which time many believe we will have well recovered by then.
Shifting gears into hotel industry and hospitality, I think 50-60% of the hotels are shut down. Majority of their staff has been laid off, 80% staff from what I understand from Hotel Association of Canada. Um, and obviously the occupancy rates have just taken a nosedive to $10 or $15 RevPAR, revenue per available room. Um, you think there's an opportunity here in Toronto or some of the other markets to shift some of the kind of like older, I mean, Fairmont is one example, obviously that will always be there, but the other end of the spectrum to change the use, especially that the travel, the discretionary expenses, corporate business travel, even leisure travel offshore, Chinese travelers, Asian travelers coming here, maybe really, really low for foreseeable future. Is there another use for some of these hotels, you think?
Yeah, certainly. I know some of them have been providing housing for shelter and for medical workers near the hospitals.
Mhm.
But I think you also have to think of the fact that there's a lot of Airbnb inventory in Toronto that is now on the market that will then get leased up for more longer term. I think I did hear that our Airbnb is going to be focusing on more long-term stays now going forward, and they raised a bunch of capital. So I think that's going to bring demand back to hotels once this recovers. And then it's just always a question of the hotel owners, how far are they stretched on properties and leveraged in order to weather the storm. But I think as things come back, I think you're going to see less Airbnb inventory, and I think that's a good thing for hotels. But also in terms of downtown Toronto hotels, there is a lot of underutilized pieces of land that could put values higher for redevelopment than the current uses, and especially if that hotel is not doing well right now, some hotel owners may decide to cull their portfolios and take some money off the table to weather this storm.
In terms of trying to pick some winners and losers, and obviously we have clients across the spectrum, and so do you. So it's unbiased in that regard, but facts are facts. Some sectors are struggling, and we just talked about hotel and perhaps retirement, given what's going on in that industry as well, especially in Quebec and Ontario. But beyond that, is it safe to assume that the winners are going to be industrial, let's say, especially e-commerce, warehousing, distribution types, along with multifamily, and the losers, or at least in the short term, retail, as well as office? co-sharing, shared space, office as well. So what are some of your comments in that regard as to if you had to put your money, where would your money be going and where would you be exiting or not touching?
Yeah, certainly you're exiting or not touching retail right now. Yeah, industrial is going to do very well and will continue to be strong. Office is debatable because, going back, once everyone is back in the office, although companies had to cut and furlough staff, there's going to be more social distancing measures. So the people that would have taken that space in terms of bodies, now they're going to be taken up by the 6 foot social distancing. So I don't necessarily see a reduction in the current office size, maybe in 6 months, but certainly not when we immediately go back. And then the debate on shared office space is certainly a debate because you can't really control if you're in a shared space who comes in, who comes out within your small company that takes space there. So that is a risk in terms of people going back and not knowing who's in the building. But at the same time, companies could choose to rent space there because of the uncertainty, which is, short-term rentals, and that's how they build their business model. So don't know which way it's going to go, but there's certainly factors influencing the good and the bad.
Last question for you. I'm going to take some bullet points from Benjamin Toll, whom we all know, recently came out with some statements, and I'm just going to read 4 or 5 of them for you. And you can pick 1 or 2 that you think are going to have most amount of impact as it relates to real estate. The first one is people in there, and he's talking about once the economy starts to open up in small batches this summer, how will the world look like? People in their 60s and older will be told to remain at home. Second one is office workers will be working from home in great numbers. The previous 1 in 5 ratio of employees working remotely will remain substantially higher as larger companies will be told to maximize employees working from home. Number 3, no large gatherings of people will be permitted. Stores will be open, but with a lot of restrictions, the 6 feet distance and lineups around the block that we're already seeing. And finally, manufacturers, which is perhaps on the industrial side, they will go flex hours with multiple shifts and even extending into the weekends.
Yeah, that's a lot. I did hear his webinar. So yeah, I think having those over 60 social distance or remain in quarantine is certainly a debate. And that gets into a wider debate on when we should open and what the specific guidelines will be. But I listened to a podcast recently where talked about contact tracing and there being apps developed for contact tracing. And if testing has been ramped up such that it is prevalent and quick, perhaps that's the best way forward. And those that have compromised immune systems or pre-existing conditions should be very careful in order to save the economy. That's a great debate, and there's another side to that debate. But certainly it's quite controversial, and I don't know if that's the right way to go. But there's those that feel like it is the way to go.
Okay, well, it's been a pleasure talking with you, Steve. Thank you for your insight, and all the best to you and your family.
Thank you. You as well.
Thanks.